Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Pirozhki. That's right, have you ever been eating a jelly donut and thought to yourself, this is really good, but instead of jelly, I wish this was filled with ground beef? Well, happy days, because that's exactly what this Russian pastry is. And I say Russian, although some of my unnamed sources say this was actually invented by the Greeks. Who knows? But I'm sure the Russians won't have any problem sharing the credit. They seem pretty chill. But regardless of who invented it, it's an amazing recipe, and it starts with what's basically a donut dough. And that'll begin with some warm milk, into which we will sprinkle our packet of yeast, and then wait 10 minutes to make sure everything's copacetic. And of course, what we're looking for is for that surface to get kind of foamy and bubbly. Basically a little something like this. And once we know our yeast is alive and growing, we'll go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients, which will include a little bit of white sugar, as well as some kosher salt. We'll also toss in a beaten egg, that I'm not sure you have to beat, but I did anyway. And we'll also do some melted butter. And then last but not least, we will add almost all our flour. And as you may remember, we like to hold a little bit back because it's always easier to mix in flour than mix in water. So as a strategy, we generally like to start our doughs off wet. And then if we need to, we can always add more flour. So that's my game plan. And I'll take my dough hook and we'll start kneading that on the stand mixer. Although you can totally do this by hand, and probably should. And what we'll want to do is knead this until it basically pulls away from the sides to form a very nice, smooth, soft, supple dough, which should, if everything goes according to plan, look very similar to this. So let me go ahead and scrape that down and transfer it onto our work surface so we can get even a better look. And while all fresh doughs really do feel amazing, there's something about doughs that have butter in them that just feel extra luxurious. But let's not waste too much time feeling dough, since what we really should be doing is transferring that back into the bowl, into which we've dripped in a few drops of oil, which we will sort of rub our dough in to make sure it doesn't dry out. And then what we'll do is cover this and let it rise in a warm spot for about 1.5 to 2 hours or until doubled. And then what we can do while our dough rises is make our beef filling. And that's going to start by adding a diced onion to some butter and olive oil set over medium-high heat. We can also go ahead and toss in our ground beef, as well as some finely minced or crushed garlic. And then we'll season this up with a little bit of kosher salt and a touch of freshly ground black pepper. And then what we'll do using some kind of wooden spoon or spatula is break all this up while it comes up to temperature in the hopes of getting a very fine crumbly mixture. And that's going to be pretty easy to accomplish as long as we're sort of continually stirring, crushing, and smearing as this browns. And what you'll notice as you get to the end of that process is that there's going to be a good amount of liquid in the pot. Right? That's totally normal. Nothing to be concerned about. But what we're going to want to do is continue cooking this, stirring occasionally, until that moisture disappears and our mixture dries out. It starts to brown up a little more, and hopefully looks something pretty close to this. And then what we'll do once that's been accomplished is turn off the heat and stir in the second most important ingredient, dry dill, which may not sound like a key ingredient, but it really is in this. Right? For me, that is one of the critical flavor elements here. So we'll go ahead and stir that in, as well as 1 splash of chicken stock or water. And you might be thinking, hey buddy, we just dried this out. Why are we adding liquid back in? Which is a pretty good question. But we're adding it because now that our meat is brown, we do want to add a little more moisture back in, as well as to glaze some of those meat juices that might have caramelized onto the bottom of the pan. And then what we'll do is let this sit with the heat off and let it cool down for about 10 minutes before we add our final ingredient, the cheese. And I'm doing 2 kinds and just a little bit. So I'm going to do a little bit of sharp cheddar, and then even a smaller amount of freshly grated Parmesan. And the reason for the light touch is because we're doing a beef filling, not a beef and cheese filling. All right, if you want beef and cheese pierogies, you want to do like half beef and half cheese. All right, for the beef filling I'm going for, the cheese is basically used as a seasoning. And I know that might be a little confusing, but I will fully explain in the blog post, since what I was trying to recreate here were the beef pierogies I used to eat as a bicycle messenger way back in the 80s. Oh yes, Chef John's had other jobs besides chef, several of which I'm allowed to talk about. But anyway, we'll go ahead and stir that in. And other than giving that a quick taste, our beef filling is done. And we will simply let that cool completely before we fill our dough, which by now should be doubled and fully ready to give the old poka. Man, that feels good. And then what we'll do is simply transfer that onto our work surface and sort of push and press out all the air to fully deflate it. And then once that's set, we will form our pirozhki as shown, we will go ahead and pinch or pull off a piece of dough and quickly form it into a ball and then press it into a little disc. And then on a lightly floured surface, we'll roll that to about 1/8 of an inch thick, maybe a little thicker, hopefully creating a round shape about 5 or so inches wide. And as usual, be careful not to use too much flour, which I might be doing right now. All right, you just want to use the bare minimum. But anyway, what we'll do is roll that out till it looks something like this. And then once that's set, before we fill this, we'll dip our finger in a little bit of water. And we will go around like this, dampening that outside edge, so everything hopefully sticks together. And then what we'll do is place our dough in one hand, and we'll sort of hold it like this, while we transfer in a couple tablespoons of our now cold beef mixture. And I will fully admit, because this filling is so crumbly, it is not super easy to work with. So we want to make sure we kind of press it down a little bit. And then basically we'll start at one end, sort of pinching up towards the middle. And I like to go up about 1/3 of the way. And you want to be a little bit careful, because while we do want this to stay sealed, we don't want to be pinching a ton of dough together. So basically pinch together the minimum amount of dough to get it to stick. And once I get about 1/3 of the way, I'll switch to the other end and pinch that up towards the center. And then making sure our filling's nicely pushed down, we'll go ahead and finish the seal. And thanks to that water, you should get some nice collusion. Sorry, I mean adhesion. But anyway, we'll go ahead and make sure that's nicely sealed. And then we'll sort of gently press it down on the table with the seam side up. And then pinch off any excess dough before we fold this up. Which might not sound too critical, but if you have too much dough in your seam, it's not going to fry up as well, and it will be harder to turn. And in case you're wondering, I'm just doing one for filming purposes. I generally try to do 3 or 4 at a time, and this obviously gets a lot quicker as you practice. And then what we'll do once that's de-doughed, and sort of pressed and flattened out a little bit like this, is moisten that center with a little bit of water. And then we'll take both ends and sort of stretch and fold them over like this, to form what we call around here a rectoval. And that's it. With the seams on the bottom, we'll give it one last press. And we've just formed our first beef Pirozhki. Have I said that different every time? I think so. Anyway, I went ahead and filled one more, which since I wasn't trying to film it, went way faster. And then once these are formed, they are definitely not ready to fry right away. All right, I highly recommend leaving those on the counter for 15 to 20 minutes before they hit the oil. And if you watch very carefully here, even though that dough's thin, it is going to puff up just a little bit. Did you see that? All right, let's watch that again. And the reason we do that is because if you don't, you might get cracks in the surface. All right, you'll see sort of like stretch marks. But if you let these rise a little bit, that's usually not a problem. And that's it. Once these are proof, we can pop those into some 375-degree oil for approximately about 1.5 minutes per side, or until beautifully golden brown and heated through. And by the way, I find these a little easier to flip if we start with the seam side down. Probably something to do with gravity and or buoyancy, but I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll fry those seam side down for about 90 seconds. Then we'll take our strainer and give them a flip. And we'll do about 90 seconds on the other side. And one thing I'm always fascinated by, as we get towards the end of the cooking time, the bubbling stops. Check it out. It's kind of spooky. But that's what happens. And when our timer rings, we'll go ahead and fish those out. And we'll transfer those onto a few paper towels to drain. And that's it. We'll simply let those cool for a couple minutes, at which point our Russian hamburger donuts are ready to enjoy. And you know how I always take one bite at a time? I could not help myself here and took 2 giant bites. And that, my friends and comrades, really was amazing. I mean, honestly, it really doesn't look that impressive inside, but the combination of that very savory, dill-scented beef filling with that beautifully light, very subtly sweet dough is just an absolutely fantastic combination. And I should mention, if you turned off this video because you don't eat beef, turn it back on. Because this is a techniques video, and you can put anything you want in these. All right, lamb, pork, turkey, chicken, whatever you're into. I mean, you are, after all, the Vladimir of what to Putin. But no matter what you end up stuffing these with, I really do hope you give them a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.